Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this gorgeous morning. We are so excited to see you all, at least via Zoom, and know that this is precious time for you. We're excited this morning to talk about our multi-year grants. Strategic grants that we made starting in 2018 through the very fateful year of 2020. It was a great example of the type of trust-based philanthropy that we like to do. Larger grants over more time, giving our partners an opportunity to really shine, and in this case, in a collaborative way. So I am excited for you to hear this morning about how that, all the great things that happened. And to lead you through that discussion, I am also very excited to introduce one of our, as we said, our moderator extraordinaire, as my colleague Tanya Salyers just called her. Dr. Sierra Austin is a member of our board, and we are so proud that she will be leading our grant making work in the coming year as our grants committee chair. So with that, I'm going to hand the baton to Sierra. Dr. Sierra Austin, thank you so much for moderating this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Kelley, for the introduction. So since the first demonstration grants in 2002, the Women's Fund of Central Ohio has been a leader in making investments in the community through grant partners to create social change for gender equity. We have applied research to identify best practices, including over 1,000 people as grant readers, backing programs and operational support others wouldn't fund, and investing in long-term change. We know that social change takes time, and it's important to measure our progress and keep best practice innovations at the forefront of our work. As such, we are continually innovating and improving our grant-making process to have the furthest reach. A tactic of amplifying this impact is working closely with our grant partners to deepen trust and build capacity. This approach is a tenet of trust-based philanthropy, which acknowledges and disrupts traditional power dynamics in philanthropy to empower greater impact. In 2018, we implemented a best practice grant-making model of multi-year funding to invest more in local organizations that were both on the front lines of change and deeply aligned with where the Women's Fund was going. This 3-year grant partner pilot program was led by 3 long-term partners to build the capacity of our community and create an even deeper impact. Multi-year grants are best practice in funding as they support resilience, fuel success, and contribute to the long-term financial stability of organizations. It is the most effective way to achieve long-term solutions and eliminates a lengthy start and stop process each year. That said, we are absolutely thrilled to have you all here first to hear directly from the grant partners about the impact that long-term grant funding and support has had on their ability to achieve social change for women and girls. So welcome, Erin, welcome, Diego, and welcome, Will. We'll start by having you introduce yourselves, your organization, and the program and/or initiative funded by the Women's Fund multi-year investment. And Erin, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sierra. And thank you to the Women's Fund for the opportunity to be here today and for just the long-term investments that you all have made in our organization. So my name is Erin Ryan. I am with the organization Innovation Ohio Education Fund. We are a multi-issue statewide policy and advocacy nonprofit. And the group that the Women's Fund has funded is called the Women's Public Policy Network. And that is really a collaborative of groups that focus on women's issues, really harnessing their power in a collective, collaborative way and focused on public policy change that builds economic opportunity for women and families.
Thank you, Erin. Will, you want to jump in?
I will, yeah. I also just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much to the Women's Fund of Central Ohio for having us, for all your long-term support, and just for organizing this discussion today. So my name is Will Petrik. I'm the budget researcher with Policy Matters Ohio. And our mission is to build a more equitable, sustainable, inclusive, and thriving Ohio. And we do that through research, budget and policy advocacy, and strategic communications. And specifically, our work with the Women's Fund is around affordable and accessible childcare. So our long-term goal is to make childcare affordable for all parents who need it, and also to help more women get and keep good jobs. We know that right now in Ohio, a single mom with 2 kids who makes $15 an hour actually makes too much to qualify for public support for childcare, and at the same time doesn't make enough to pay and afford high quality childcare for both of her kids. Childcare costs, almost as much as a college education costs. So we know that also the women who work in childcare, the workforce is disproportionately women, 95% women, and disproportionately women of color who make poverty level wages. And so we see both the need to increase wages for women in the childcare workforce, but also ultimately to help women get and keep good jobs and stay in the workforce and have access to childcare. So a big part of our work has really been about pushing to make sure childcare is more accessible and affordable for women and families.
Thank you so much, Will, and greatly appreciate that intersectional analysis you did for us. So talking about not only gender, but also socioeconomic status and race as well. And that intersectional approach is certainly something that we pride ourselves on at the Women's Fund. And certainly, last but certainly not least, Diego, tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And I will echo Erin and Will in thanking you all, the Women's Fund, for this commitment to our organizations. I work for Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio. Most people know what Planned Parenthood does or what we do through our health centers, our brick and mortar health services division. But what I think not as many people know is our education and outreach programming. And that's what the area in which the Women's Fund and Planned Parenthood has been partners for a long time. I remember the first time we got together was when in 2009, I believe, when the One Girl study or initiative from the Women's Fund came out. And that's what pushed us at Planned Parenthood after seeing that study to say we need to do more to specifically look at issues that affect teenage young women in Central Ohio. How can we use our education and outreach efforts towards that? And we created the Peer Education Program, which is a program in which we train young people. Back then it was just young women, but now it's outside of gender-specific participants. And we train them, and they stay with us for 1 full year minimum to become experts on sexuality, on reproductive health, on leadership. And I again want to thank the Women's Fund for providing your support to that program. We have trained so many people over the years through your support, thanks to your support, and we have expanded the program now, not only from Central Ohio, but now it's a statewide program. So thank you for that. And I forgot to introduce myself, Diego Espino, Vice President of Community Engagement.
Thank you, Diego. We know it's early. Well, thank you all for telling us a bit about yourselves and the organizations that you're representing, clearly doing some very phenomenal social change work. So this question I'm not posing to anyone in particular, but very interested in hearing everyone's thoughts. And that is, we'd like you to help us understand the impact of the multi-year commitment. How is it different in year 1, 2, and 3? What did it look like?
I'm happy to jump in and start in our introduction order. So for us, it made a huge difference having that sustained funding. We're an organization that works at the public policy level, primarily at the State House, and policy change can be really slow and it can be incremental. As much as we want those bold, really swift policy changes that change women's lives and that impact their ability to build economic security, that's not often the case. And so for us to be able to know that we had 3 years to really think long term, and we didn't have to kind of hustle at the end of year 1 to re-up our grant application for the next year, was really, fundamental to our ability to think long term and to make those changes that we did over those 3 years. I think the increased funding was also incredibly helpful for us. We're a small but nimble team. With the Women's Public Policy Network, it's myself and then a part-time executive director, Liz Brown. And so, we're a part of a larger organization at Innovation Ohio Education Fund, but our team is small. And so every dollar really counts. It makes a difference. Our ability to put that funding towards staff support that, often a lot of organizations and funders don't want to fund some like overhead costs. And so that was, just knowing the Women's Fund kind of put that trust in us and truly invested in our talent and our time and the work that we were really leading over a 3-year period made all the difference in our ability to feel supported and feel sustained and to think about that long-term impact over those 3 years.
And I can also jump in. Similar to Erin, our work is focused on social change and policy change, and we know that is long-term work. It's work to help educate the public, educate members of the media, and lawmakers. And lawmakers change from election to election, so there's a lot of work to really align leaders and get leaders to really understand the critical needs that women and girls are facing, but also what are the solutions to improve the quality of life, to strengthen the workforce. And so as I think about kind of the differences in year 1, year 2, year 3 for Policy Matters Ohio, year 1 really was a lot of learning and doing kind of foundational research about what's the kind of state of Ohio in terms of access to childcare, in terms of affordability. What does that mean for women and for families? And another part of year 1 was also, this cohort here. So the Women's Public Policy Network, Planned Parenthood, really building relationships with this cohort, learning more about how our different issues intersect and impact one another. And I would say year 2, another part of year 1, so there was a gubernatorial election. And so this is part of public policy work is, asking lawmakers to take a position. And so then candidate DeWine, who was running for governor, said, I do want to make childcare more affordable and accessible for working families. And he made a commitment to increase initial eligibility up to 150% during the campaign. The next year was the state budget. And so we were pushing for an increase up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And basically we didn't actually see that commitment from the governor in the executive budget, but we did use that state budget cycle. We're actually coming to an end of another state budget cycle this month. But we use that process to work with partners to build alignment around that goal of making childcare affordable and accessible for parents, increasing initial eligibility up to 200% of the federal poverty level. But there was also new infrastructure that was built. So I think your support helped seed the Women's Public Policy Network, so a group that was really thinking about women's interests. But we also helped emerge or helped found the Ohio Children's Budget Coalition. So this is another coalition that was really focused on outcomes for kids. And that's been really instrumental in terms of the state budget and state policy debate. So yeah, the long-term support is really helpful in terms of just laying the groundwork for these policy changes that we need.
Thanks, Will. And Diego, of course, we want to hear from you. And just so we have the question again, help us understand the impact of the multi-year commitment for Planned Parenthood. How is it different in years 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our funded program, the peer education program, is a year-long program. So in the past, we will look at 1 year commitments from both the participants, the youth, and obviously the funding stream, and that's how we will operate. So it was just 1 year block. What we noticed is that specifically with the participants, it was a barrier to say, okay, towards the end of the year, we don't know what's going to happen with the program next year. So we'll keep you updated. But if you want to join in again next year, we'll let you know, right? So that was also, we noticed some ways in which we were losing that participation energy. So with the 3-year commitment, we immediately started with recruiting youth who were sophomore in their high school, knowing that, and obviously from the beginning, we told them if you want to stay with the program, you can stay with us for 3 years until you're graduated from high school. And a lot of that happened, right? So we were able to secure commitment from the participants themselves for 3 years, thanks to the ability to know that funding stream was going to be there for those 3 years. So year 1, we concentrated on one aspect of the program, which was a training, making sure that the youth had all the tools they needed in order to inform their peers about these important topics, sexuality and their health. And then, then year 2, we were able to concentrate more on building their leadership skills, like being able to engage in advocacy, working in their schools. There were some of the groups that we had in the program that advocated in year 2 to bring or to increase access to knowledge about sexuality within their schools, to work with their schools administration. So that was a lot of the advocacy components that we had. And then in year 3, we were able to concentrate on getting them the tools to then prepare themselves to what was next in their lives, right? We brought in speakers from colleges, universities, trade schools that talk to our participants in order for them to get to that, all while still doing the essence of the program, which still gaining more knowledge, getting more, spreading the word about evidence-based, medically accurate information among their peers. So yeah, that's a way in which we're able to structure a program. Basically almost it created a speciality for each of those years that gave more, or a concentration for each of those years that gave more, that strengthened the program.
And I actually realized I didn't touch on year 3, but
go right ahead.
I mean, so what happened in year 3 was 2020, right? COVID emerged and the pandemic hit, and that impacted everyone's life. And policy really does matter in that kind of state of emergency, a public health emergency, but also economic crisis. And so I think, again, back to the long-term support, that allowed Policy Matters to, in some ways, pivot. There was a lot of focus on, we need federal relief, we need federal stimulus, we need $50 million to really save the childcare infrastructure and industry. And so we actually wrote a report highlighting the impact of COVID on the childcare sector, calling on federal government and federal lawmakers to provide that relief. And so that long-term support allowed us to have some flexibility between advocating at the state level, but also asking for support at the federal level as well.
And I would just echo that from the Women's Public Policy Network. We, the folks who are working, I mean, everyone had to really shift and think about what their programs looked like. And for us, that also meant, as a group primarily focused at the State House, we saw the COVID relief coming from Congress. And so we were able to, like Will said, shift our work to think about, how do we make sure that the women who are women were hit the earliest and the hardest, and especially Black and Latinx women, thinking about those increased caregiving duties, the increased unemployment, the economic instability, that all aligned with the program that the Women's Fund was funding. And so I just echo again what Will said, of year 3 was very much taking that pivot and not feeling like we couldn't do what was best for the program and what was needed to serve the women and families that we were really committed and dedicated to, by taking that shift to thinking about how we use our advocacy, our voices, our coalition power to move federal policy change, while also keeping our eye on the State House and keeping a look at ways that we needed to be involved on state level issues too.
Thank you for adding that, Erin. Diego, did you have anything to add? I know that there was a great deal of pivoting to accommodate, the virtual nature of everything over the last year or so. Did you have anything to add about the impact of COVID and how the Women's Fund grant was able to kind of build capacity for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, in fact, and again, thank you, Erin and Will, to bringing that up. For us, the way it worked is, when COVID came, this life-changing event in March of last year, at least March when the schools started closing and the protocols, state protocols were implemented. At that time, the peer educators in the program had been with us for 2.5 years, or a little over 2.5 years. So they trusted us. They knew who we were. They've been working with us for this long, and they really were our partners in pivoting the program to a digital format, to a virtual programming. So they worked with us hand in hand to switch to a program that was in-person programming. We were meeting with them in person. We were going to their schools. They themselves were, spreading this information in person among their peers, among their community. So they worked with us to immediately shift all of our work to utilizing Google Classrooms, to utilizing social media. We piloted some things with them to ensure that what we were trying to do did work with youth their age, of course. That was the most important thing, right? But that actually came from having that trust, having that long working relationship with them. So within probably 6 weeks, we were completely converted into a virtual programming, and I do believe it's thanks to that, ability to have worked with them for that long. So by mid-April, the peer educators were all doing their conversations, spreading this information through social media posts, through our social media platforms that we built with them. We were continuing to do the training for them through our Google Classroom newly created sessions. So and then for the rest of from April to the end of the school year, or the fiscal year in June, we were able to continue to get youth into that format modality. And we were super happy that we had the ability to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So my next question for all of you are, what are some of the milestones that you would like to celebrate? What are some of the milestones
I can jump in. So I think one big milestone happened earlier this year. There was a bill that was introduced in the Ohio House. It was House Bill 145. And this was introduced with bipartisan support. And it's basically aligned with our goal, to make childcare more affordable and accessible, to help more women get back to work. And the overall policy lever is increasing initial eligibility for publicly funded childcare up to 200% of the federal poverty level. So just the fact that that was introduced, that there was a lot of different organizations that came in and testified in support of that, that was a big milestone to actually have legislation that was aligned with our goal. I would say another thing, just right now, actually, the state budget passed out of conference committee and passed the House and the Senate late last night. So I know Erin and I were up late monitoring what was going on in the budget. But the conference committee version does increase initial eligibility up to 142% of the federal poverty level. So not to our goal of 200%, but better than what it's at now, which is 130% of the federal poverty level. And just so folks have context, for a family of three, 130% of the federal poverty level is about $28,500 annually, or $13.75 an hour. And 142% for, again, a family of three is a little over $31,000 annually, and just under $15 an hour. So it's $14.99 an hour for a family of three. So now, families that are making at or below that level will be able to access subsidized childcare. So that's a policy win. That's something that will expand access to more working moms. So that's a big deal. That's why we're in the work. The other thing that I think is a milestone is the American Rescue Plan and the stimulus that passed in December. Between the two of those, actually did pass the $50 billion in childcare relief. And so Ohio specifically will be seeing over $1.3 billion to support access and affordability, and also to stabilize childcare providers. So some big kind of immediate relief in terms of pandemic relief at the federal level too.
I can jump in here. For us, I think I'll pick up on my last point about virtual programming. I think for us, that had been one of the biggest milestones for us last year, which was the ability to respond to a pandemic while also setting ourselves up, or the program, for the future, right? And that is doing programming virtually. That now has allows us to being able to expand the program, also breaking down geographic barriers in some instances where we had in the past. So we replicated the program not only in Central Ohio, but in other areas of the state. And in some areas of the state, in fact, we have participants from places where we don't have a health center nearby, where we don't have an education center nearby. But then now we're able to reach those people, those youth who are now becoming health ambassadors within their communities, thanks to this virtual programming, right? And now we can be in Columbus, we can be in Cleveland at one of our offices, but then our participants are anywhere in the state, learning together with those participants within those cities. So it's to us a great response to an very unfortunate event that happened last year. And for us, again, to know that now we have the ability to do so. once the schools start opening again this fall, we probably will go back to do some meeting in person, but the virtual programming will not go away, right? We will continue to do that. So I think for us, that was a way in which it completely changed the way we operate, and I think it now has expanded our ability to touch more areas in the state.
Thank you. Erin, would you like to share any milestones with us?
Absolutely. For us, as I said at the beginning, policy change can be slow. To Will's point, the ability to have a bill even introduced and multiple hearings on it is a win. And the ability to actually get that policy change is huge. And so I think a milestone for us was just really bolstering and building up our work on paid family and medical leave. We were able to build a formal partnership with the national group called PLUS, Paid Leave for the US. And they were looking to expand, and Ohio was on the list of states where they wanted to build their infrastructure. And because of the work and because of the partnership that we had built around the issue of paid leave, in part, and a big part, because of the funding from the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, they looked and they said, you're an organization we want to partner with. You have infrastructure here. You have a bunch of groups that already know the issue. And so we formed a formal partnership with them. They have a full-time staffer who works in Ohio, is embedded into our infrastructure. During pre-COVID times, we shared an office together. And so that really allowed us to amplify that work and to have someone who was in the coalition who really was solely focused on one issue of paid leave. Every day she would come to the office and she would think, how are we going to move paid leave? And for us, that got us thinking, how are we going to move paid leave every day? And so to have her connected, have every decision, every strategic conversation was in partnership with us. And she brought that expertise to the coalition that would just not have been there otherwise. So that was huge. We were able to, with the Women's Fund leadership, partner on a legislative briefing with co-hosted by Representative Joyce Beatty that was focused around the gender and racial wealth gaps. And paid leave was a huge part of that event, along with a bunch of other really important policy issues. And we were also able to work with the bill sponsors to get a second hearing for proponent testimony on paid family leave. That's the first time that has happened in the history of the paid leave bill being introduced session after session after session and getting nowhere. Unfortunately, all that work happened, I think in February of 2020, and then COVID hit. And so our work pivoted again to the federal level. And now, because of that momentum that national groups and state groups and advocates and business leaders have built, we're really close to winning a paid leave policy for everybody in the United States and in Congress. And so our ability to be a part of that and to lend our voice and to really shift our partners to that work is really, it comes down to that investment from the Women's Fund, being able to think long-term and being able to have that financial support to do the work we need to do around policy change. And I would just add one other thing of milestones or successes around an assessment process that we've done. So again, that long-term planning and thinking, and I think especially with the pandemic, a lot of groups are kind of taking that step back to say, how can we make sure our programs are more effective, are responding to these issues impacting families that have just been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we undertook for the first time a real assessment process with our nearly 40 coalition partners. We did a series of phone interviews, we did an anonymous survey, and then we really analyzed that data that we had gathered from that, thinking about what our partners wanted us to do, where they wanted us to move in the next 5 years. And it has really helped us focus on what our assets are as an organization, and how do we move forward from this moment we're in right now. And that is a huge milestone for us to think beyond sometimes the next day of, there's so much happening, policy change. While that can be slow, the legislature and Congress can move very quickly. And so our ability to just take that pause and refresh as an organization and have these kind of next steps and a real forward-thinking plan and long-term vision is a huge milestone for us. And that really comes down to that long-term investment and the ability to take that time to think long-term.
Wow, that's so phenomenal. Thank you all for sharing. Just want to remind our audience to please submit questions if you have them for our panelists. But one question, and you all have kind of touched on this in some capacity that we want to ask, and that is, what is one thing on the horizon that's a result from the previous years of sustained funding that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do? So what's one thing on the horizon as a result of the previous years of sustained funding that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do?
I can kind of pick up. I think for us, that assessment process of having, again, as I kind of talked through it, it was a way for us to listen to our partners and our stakeholders. And the work that we're moving forward is more intentionally and fully centering racial justice and equity. We do take an intersectional gender justice lens to our issues, but really centering women of color in that work, not just in name, in practice in the work we do, in the partners who sit around our table, in the folks who have those leadership positions. And explicitly centering Black women and Latinx women who have been just, have always had long-term and historic inequities, and that, again, have just been exacerbated by the crisis. Doing local level work and thinking about where those levers for change are in local government, where we can see some wins and some real impact on folks' lives immediately. And then just being more intentional about how we present those, like leadership within our coalition. So we've already kind of shifted our model just this past month of having organizations in the coalition or other stakeholders kind of lead like a learning session during the meeting. So that's something that is still, we're still kind of getting those next steps ready, and really in the summer, just making those clear pivots and changes to how we do our work and how we really strengthen what works within the coalition, and we get rid of what doesn't or what is not actually beneficial to partners. And that's something that I really see a real ability to lift up those positive things that we as a coalition bring, and to really focus on, we have a map for the next few years that we are really going to start putting into place, and really leaning on our partners to do that work. And again, that came out of that opportunity to just kind of breathe and pause and take stock of what was happening within the policymaking world and within ourselves as an organization. And now we have our marching orders, and we're going to put that into place.
I can go next if it's okay. For us, I did, like you said, I did mention briefly earlier that we had the ability to see what a 3-year long, essentially, program could be, and what are the results. Otherwise, we would have never been able to test something like that, right? Or pilot something like that. So where we've been doing a 1-year programming, this in essence became a 3-year program. And for us, we were able to see the results in the ability to concentrate on certain areas that were not possible in the past. So I think it's great for us to have that knowledge, to have those tools, and to continue to push forward to say, hey, this is what with a long-term commitment can do to a program, because now we know we have the data, we have the results, we have the ability to demonstrate the benefits of something like that. Again, we would not have had that opportunity if it wasn't for the Women's Fund.
Thanks, Diego. How about you, Will? What's something that's on the horizon as a result of the previous year's sustained funding?
So there's several things on the horizon.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, just considering the national conversation around childcare, the American Families Plan is something that's being discussed nationally, and it really part of the conversation is childcare as infrastructure. But I think there's also been just a huge resurgence that policy again matters when it comes to the well-being of women and kids and families. We saw through COVID over 2 million women left the workforce. And I'm sure many women who are logged in this morning, know personally just the experience and the challenges of trying to juggle raising and supporting a child, and also trying to work, also trying to care for your child or keep them in school. And all of those challenges really highlighted a big hole. And even before COVID, there's a hole in terms of the lack of access to childcare. But I do think that there's a big opportunity with the American Families Plan to expand access to childcare and to pre-K. And I think one thing that we wouldn't be in a position, we get calls from the media to make comments on the American Families Plan, but we wouldn't be in that position of being an authority on those issues and being in a position to kind of shape the media landscape and the public understanding of what is at stake, and how could this impact you and your family. So I think that's one thing that's a result of all those years of previous funding. I talked about House Bill 145. Again, just the fact that there's legislation that's aligned with our goals gives us an opportunity to continue to work with partners, to continue to educate the public, and identify lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who support this, who understand, and we can help them understand why this is so important. Another thing, again, that we wouldn't be positioned, I don't think, without your long-term support is, we were recently asked to submit recommendations for those federal relief dollars for childcare. And I don't think we would have been seen again as an authority on childcare policy without your long-term support. So those are just a few things that certainly your support and your partnership has positioned us to continue to grow and make a difference in this area.
Wonderful, thank you. Got more questions, of course. And so the next question is, what do you think participants and/or the community learned as a result of partaking in a multi-year commitment? What do you think participants and/or the community learned as a result of this multi-year commitment?
I can go if that's okay. As I mentioned earlier, I think for us, the direct beneficiaries of this multi-year funding were the participants, the peer educators, the cohort of youth that we train. As I mentioned before, they were the ones who got the ability to be more ingrained with us or being part of the program for a longer period of time. That means they were able to expand their skill sets more than in previous cohorts that were only with us for 1 year, right? They, as I mentioned, as I described it earlier, they were able to increase the leadership skills more than a previous cohort that were only with us for 1 year. Their advocacy skills, their knowledge, they also had the ability to again work with us as partners, because we had the time, right? Whereas in the past it was just, we always pride ourselves with getting input from our participants, but we also run against timing. So there are times where we ensure that we have to ensure that the program runs on its timeline. With a long-term commitment, like a 3-year commitment in this case, we had more time, right? We had more ability to then sit down to create focus groups, to listen more to the participants in order to shape the program to make it better. So for us, that was the case. And then in turn, of course, because of the structure of our program, our peer educators then take that information to their peers, right? And then their peers benefit from that. Their community benefits from that directly. They're having more informed, more skilled peer educators within their communities. And then obviously that always benefits. That just plus within the program.
I mean, for us, I think folks learned that, we're here to stay. When we first started in 2015, the Women's Fund was really seed grant funding, our first funder for the coalition. I think funding coalition work can be really difficult because people are looking for that proof of concept, or they're wondering, well, why do you need a coalition to do this work? And the Women's Fund knows because of partnership and collaboration and convening is a big part of who they are as an organization. They knew they weren't taking a chance, they were making an investment, and they were allowing us to grow into what we are today as a force at the State House and in policy. And so, the lawmakers that we work with, the community partners, our own coalition partners, kind of saw that as this is our ability to really make those investments in ourselves and in a long-term commitment to remaining a presence and a voice in that policymaking space.
Thanks, Erin.
I think for us, one of the things that the community has learned is, childcare. I think we see high quality childcare specifically through the lens of early childhood development. And I think our partnership has really shifted the conversation to also see childcare as a critical workforce support for women. And that, childcare really is the workforce behind the workforce. So when we think about COVID, parents need childcare to get back to work. And so childcare is both an issue that's critical for the future of our kids, and it's also something that, as we think about the economic recovery, childcare is central to that. And so I think the community and the public is learning that. We also know that, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, but I think more and more the public is learning that the whole foundation of the childcare system is built on a low-wage workforce. It's built on, again, 95% women and disproportionately Black and brown women who make just on average $10.65 an hour. And so again, we talk about this is, a critical workforce behind the workforce. They're, on the front lines supporting the essential workers, but childcare workers are essential workers. They're caring for our kids. They're helping parents be able to know that they have a safe place and a caring place and a place that's developmentally appropriate for their child. And so I think that all of that learning is really critical for the public to ultimately move the needle toward the policy changes that we want to see.
I want to add, Will, I think we learned that women are foundational to our economy too, and to that caregiving infrastructure. Childcare is a big piece of that, but just overall, we saw the way our economy and our world changed, and women are the ones who are the backbones of that holding it. So I think that's another lesson that kind of branches out from what you just shared.
Absolutely.
I know that I could sit and talk to the three of you all day, but unfortunately we are out of time. So again, just want to thank you for the very critical and intersectional work that you're doing in our community. Erin, you said something that I thought was phenomenal, and it's that the community learned that we're here to stay, right? And that's an important message considering how long-term this work is and what an investment it is into generations that we will not even see, right? So thank you all again for your time and for the work that you've done. And I will turn the program back over to Kelley.
Well, thank you so much, Sierra, for your for leading us this morning. And I do want to say our partners were very kind to thank the Women's Fund for this very important investment that we made in their work as a collaborative. But I want to thank them for being on the front lines of this very important advocacy work that, quite frankly, needs to be invested in by so many. And the Women's Fund is quite honored to have the ability to know these organizations well, to have long relationships with them, and to be able to invest in them in the way that we do. I think Erin said the Women's Fund knew we weren't taking a chance, we were making an investment. And that's such an important and poignant thing to remember, because not enough of us in philanthropy take an investment. We treat it like it's a chance. We treat it like it's a risk to invest long-term and at higher levels in these types of efforts. But I think what you've heard this morning, and what I'm so proud to have heard again, is that it's exactly this type of enlightened philanthropy that makes the difference, that gives anyone that's trying to accomplish generational change the ability to make that change. A colleague of ours at the Ms. Foundation, Teresa Younger, always says, if you want to correct 400 years plus of discrimination, you need at least a generation. And the Women's Fund is just finishing its first generation of work this year. And I hope what you heard from this conversation is that our ability in 2018 to invest deeply in these organizations for a 3-year term changed the trajectory of their work and has changed the trajectory of our impact. So remember, though, this isn't about what the Women's Fund did. This is about what all of you did. Together, we are the Women's Fund. The Women's Fund is a vehicle. When you donate to us, we are able to amass those funds, starting at $1 and going to $1 million or more. We're able to amass those donations and make these types of investments in a trust-based, bold way to create change for the longer term, to create generations of change. And yes, maybe we need a generation, but I think what you heard this morning is that we can actually make quite an impact in 3 years, especially when one of those years turns out to be one of the most difficult years of most of our lives. So I hope for all of you that you feel the power of the fact that your donations made this happen, and that your donations will continue to make this happen. We are kicking off yet another year. This strategic grant collaboration is over, but we are proud and excited about what comes next for the Women's Fund, with the power of your donations and the power of your passion for creating social change. So we hope that you will stay with us to hear about all that's coming in our new next generation of work. And we hope, please invest, support our work, so that we can continue to boldly support the work of amazing partners like those you heard from this morning. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.